Okay.
So we're going to wrap this up. 2 weeks ago, we were talking about immorality, and while I was away, I thought of something with immorality that I wanted to throw out because it wasn't covered in the book. But internet porn. Would you consider that a respectable sin or no? And if no, why not?
It's too visible. It's just called out a lust sin. That's yeah. Unfortunately, it's too accessible.
It's very accessible, yeah.
For even younger kids. I don't think society blows it off.
Yeah, that's what I think. When I think of respectable sins, I think they're sins that we have just sort of come to say, it's not that bad. And I don't think it's that internet porn isn't that bad. It's just you don't know. You can't see it.
Yeah.
So you can get away with it. You know what I mean? So you can have it secretly, and in that sense, it's respectable because you could go on about your life. And
It's always like that, though. You can hide a book.
Yeah, it's just easier. Yeah, internet porn is just more accessible.
So much easier.
Yeah. I mean, anybody that has a cell phone can do it.
It's easier to carry around your phone than a book or a magazine. So.
Yeah.
I mean,
and it comes at you even if you're not looking for it.
Yeah.
You know, that's the thing. Like you get gradually sucked into it.
Yeah.
I mean, like, it's the soft porn has always been there. I'm like, we were watching this thing on Brooke Shields, and they were showing some of her old commercials, and I'm like, how did they get away with having a child do those kind of moves on TV in the 1970s?
Yeah.
It was. I'm like sitting here. I'm like, I don't want to watch it anymore.
Yeah.
I'm like, it was just.
So she was no Shirley Temple.
Well, that's what she was known for. One of her first movies.
Who? Brooke Shields?
Yeah,
Her first movie was in foreign country. She played a child prostitute.
Oh well, her first American movie. I can't remember what it was. A big one. Yeah, I'm not gonna say it on camera.
Oh,
but she was
one.
very young.
Yes.
Yeah.
But she had parental consent to do all this, if I'm correct.
Her mom was her agent.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I don't think she had the full capacity and knowledge of what all it entailed.
And she keeps trying to get the pictures back from all
And
this.
she was such a people pleaser, and it just.
I mean, I brought it up because some people would say, well, it's a victimless thing.
Oh, absolutely not.
Oh, okay. How many serial killers have killed people because they got their start in porn?
Exactly.
I mean, you can't say that.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said. It's a what thing?
Victimless.
Who were you looking at?
Yeah.
But
especially if it's children. A lot of times it's children. They're not. They didn't consent.
But I
that's
do
illegal,
think
though.
society is trying to normalize it. I mean, gosh, it's you have the 50 Shades of Grey's movies that came out, which were basically soft porn. Really, if you never saw them, don't.
medium porn.
But it was just something,
Yeah. No, I agree. I think society is trying to normalize it and trying to convince everybody that it's not a big deal, but it really is because, like Jeff said, it leads to other things. I mean, you can just travel on down the road till you get to the other things where now you're doing child porn or whatever. I don't know. I brought it up because I thought about it and about how society is trying to normalize it and tell you it's not a big deal. And I don't necessarily agree with that. It's not a big deal.
It's a distortion.
It is. And granted, the people that are in the porn might be doing it agreeably, but there again, are they the victims too?
Oftentimes they are.
Yeah. Yeah. It's because of, and this is where I thought about it, because of the sex trafficking that goes on in the world these days, some of those people may not be doing it because they agreed to do it. They may be doing it because they're forced to do it. Or this is the price you pay for us bringing you into the country illegally, or whatever it might be. So,
Yeah, but that's very true, but sadly, there's this OnlyFans, that's a website where people could just go on and make money.
That's a choice.
That's a choice.
It's a
Yeah.
choice.
That's what I'm
Oh,
saying.
yeah.
No, what
Yeah.
I'm saying is,
yeah.
even though you're right that there are a lot of people who get into it, get lured into it or whatever against their will. What's scary is that there are people that are proudly now just saying that they're just prostituting themselves basically online.
Well, there's a whole pornography industry, if you think about it,
Yeah.
between
Well, I mean-
magazines and movies and,
But I mean, it's like, yeah, I paid my way through college doing that, like as if it's a
Yeah.
legitimate college,
Yeah.
second job or something,
Yeah.
or,
Yeah,
Yeah.
and they're proud of it.
Yeah, like I
And
could
then
go
they'll
waitress
try to get
tables and
jobs
make
like-
this,
yeah,
but.
and then they'll try to get jobs like being a teacher and stuff, and things like that. They were
Yeah,
talking
yeah,
about,
and they want to normalize it, well, I was
And
thinking
the
about
woman
it.
who was talking, she's like, yes, you can do whatever you want, but not everything is okay. She said, kids go online and they will look you up.
oh, sure.
And,
Oh, yeah.
And it'll ruin your career anyway.
Yeah, yeah, I can see that now, that kids look it up and go, oh, Mrs. So-and-so was,
Yeah, you see that all the time with these teachers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's not only, like, things like porn and stuff, it's looked at differently from men, from boys to girls even.
Yes.
And boys are looked at differently. Like we were watching this show where there was a predator, like a ex-predator in their neighborhood, and they all went over to see what, to talk to her. The entire neighborhood, I'm like, this is almost like a mob. I don't know how this is going to end. They just wanted to talk to her, and they found out that she had that she had a relationship with a 15-year-old boy, and everybody was like, oh, that's okay. Everybody except for his wife, and she looked at him. She said, "Am I the only one that has a problem with this?"
Yeah.
And they're like, "Yeah." I'm like, so I mean, it's just.
Yeah. Yeah, it's gotten to that point. Well,
Yeah.
I didn't know that's where it was over.
the Bible says that we're gonna end up going down this road. That society is just gonna degenerate. as
Oh
we-
yeah.
as
Well,
we go.
there is a movie that they haven't played that they said they made. It's about a pedophile
Okay.
trying to make it look like that's okay lifestyle.
Yeah.
Like everything is good. Like we treat just about everything like very liberal people treat like just about every kind of lifestyle is okay
Yeah.
as long as it doesn't hurt anybody.
I think.
How can a pedophile not hurt anybody?
Yeah.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
if
Exactly.
you ask them, they have a justification for it.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
worse.
Usually it's I was born this way.
No,
That's-
it's worse than that.
I've said this to Connie many times over the last couple of years, and I feel that our country and society as a whole, universally, is at the point of the end of the book of Joshua, where he says, every man is doing what is right in his own eyes. And I think that's where we are. And that's where the justification comes in, because it's okay to me, so it should be fine to everybody else. So, yeah. So I think that's where we are.
And if it's not fine to somebody, it's their problem, not mine.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. All right. Well, then we're going to move along to the last part, which was on idolatry. And he defined this as anything we place such a high value on that it tends to absorb our emotional and mental energy, our time and resources. And then he talked about people's careers. So this one kind of I had a little bit of trouble with, because is it wrong to have career goals?
No.
Yeah,
Just don't make it your obsession.
that's what I was gonna say. Can you have career goals and make it so that doesn't become your idol. That's the only thing, like he said, you're putting all your emotional and mental energy and time and resources into your career goals.
He says here that it takes precedence over our relationship with God or family.
Yes. And there are people who their career goals do take a higher spot over everything. I mean, they'll work 18, 20 hours a day to be able to get to that next position, that next step in the process of their company. So, but yeah, I don't think it's wrong to have career goals as long as you have them in the right place. Somebody asked me years ago, I'd only been a Christian for a couple of years, about where I place different things. And I said, well, it's like this: God, family, job. So job, you're number 3. There's 2 people above you. So I'm working for the first 2 before I get to you. So, but, again, you got to have a right perspective for your career goals.
And you can't. Okay, example. When I was in my late 30s, I had the idols of I need to work 2 jobs to pay the bills. It was, we had college loans we were paying off. We were late college people. Anyway, and I had children I had to buy shoes for, and I had a car payment, and so I just felt the need to just use more hours away from my family. And that was an idol, because if I had trusted God, I'm sure He would have provided. So there, it wasn't getting ahead in my job. It was being out of the house because I thought I needed to be.
Yeah. And I kind of did the same thing. I took a job for a number of years that it was swing shift. So I never really knew, well, I did know from month to month or whatever, but when you work swing shift, there's 2 shifts where you basically don't see your family a whole lot, 2nd and 3rd. And I took it because it paid very well. But eventually I got to the point where I was like, I can't do this anymore. My kids are involved in things at school. My son wants to play midget football. And so I applied for a different job and took a huge pay cut, but it was worth it. And eventually, through working at that job, I got the pay scale back. So it was okay. So God provided because I decided to put family first over job. Jeff, you look like you have something you want to say.
Like it's a job I'm like, you hear all the time about people sacrificing for a job because they feel like they're doing the Lord's work and things like that, and their families are suffering. Like I was reading one book, and the guy went for years of his life eating eggs for every meal because they couldn't afford anything else. I mean, how does a person know, is this really what God wants me to do? And my family just needs to understand that they're not going to be getting certain things just because I'm working this job when I could be doing something else. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Where's the line between God will provide and God wants us to be able to raise our families, without having to sacrifice so much. You know what I mean?
And I'm thinking of an example of this too. There's such a thing as going too far with the God will provide thing. There was a guy I worked with years ago, and don't remember if he got laid off or if he quit. And I asked him, I think he quit, and I asked him what he was going to do, and he said, I don't know, I don't have another job, God will provide. I have trouble with that, because yes, God will provide, but that doesn't mean you don't do anything.
It doesn't come down in a golden basket.
Yeah, I mean, we're supposed to work. I mean, all through the Bible, most of the people in the Bible worked in some way. It may have been tending herds or tending the fields or whatever, but they worked. So God doesn't want us to just sit around and wait for Him to shower us with provisions. So, but as far as a job goes, well, that's tough. I mean, that's kind of, God has to talk to you about it. And that's where it came for me, was when my kids were getting involved in all this stuff, and I thought, you know, I'm supposed to be putting God, family above job. So family is suffering because I'm not there. And that was my decision on that.
The only thing I would say that I think that is really a tough, scenario, but the way I look at it is, if God's calling you to a ministry, you feel that God is calling you to a ministry, and you know that that path will lead to, or you're on a path that's leading to you not providing for your family, or any other thing that seems like, okay, this doesn't make sense. I said to I don't want to get into a long story, but my daughter, when she wanted to change colleges before she'd even been there 6 weeks, and it was like 180 degrees, like different from what she was so convinced of 6 weeks before and talked me into. And I said to her, "Where's your burning bush?" Which I wasn't very happy
there
about.
you go.
That's me. I need a burning bush for
over
everything.
here.
But I
Yep.
said to her, okay, you want to change majors, you want to do something different, let's go about it in a way that you're not in deep debt, and we're not in deep debt, and we're going to do it in a financially responsible way. But I feel like I've never been more sure of anything that this is what I want to do. Okay, but we still have to pay for it,
Yeah.
right, and not go in debt. So she wanted to just leave. And now, if you had a burning bush, if God came to you like He did to Moses, and you want to, and then you want to do something that, like the best example I have is Joshua. God tells him, you're going to march around the city for seven whatever, and then
7
blow your
days,
trumpets,
yeah.
and the walls are going to throw.
Yeah.
You're like, what? That's insane. I'm
Yeah.
not doing that. Let me send you an angel, the archangel. Okay, I'll do that. So if God's calling you to march around the building or a city for
Right.
7 days and blow a trumpet to win a war.
Yeah.
You better have an angel.
Yeah.
And so I think kind of that's what I'm saying. Like, if you don't have a burning bush or an angel that came and visited you and made it really, really clear that you're supposed to just trust God, even though, your kids aren't being provided for,
Yeah.
like basic needs aren't being provided for,
Yeah.
then I would rethink that, or I would
Yeah.
take it to other people, or and say, okay, like, what do you think about this? Is this wise? And that's what I was instructing my daughter to do. Like,
Right.
let's talk it out. Let's think it through. What do your parents have to say? You're 18 years old, 19
Yeah.
years old.
Yep.
Run that by wise counsel.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
But we don't know. I don't think, on the one hand, I don't think we sit back and wait for a burning bush to do something. But if you're going to do something that makes no sense,
Yeah.
then you probably should have a guiding something, beyond
Some type of guidance.
something to abandon all logic,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Your burning bush to go back to college that confirmed it was when you came out and said from work, God told me to go back to college. And I said, okay, you and God figure out how to pay for that.
Yeah.
Because we were young and didn't have a lot of money and we had
2
kids.
Yeah.
And I don't know how it got to your boss, but his boss said to him, what are you waiting for? Why are you waiting a whole semester? Well, he said, we got to get the funds together so we can move on to campus and pay for and the boss said, I will pay for your first semester. So that's the burning bush.
Yeah, he paid for more than the first semester. But
Yeah,
We didn't ask anybody to
Yeah.
pay for
No,
it.
Yeah.
no. I didn't ask him for anything. He just
Yeah.
asked me a question. The other one that I thought of is when I graduated, we had talked to a mission agency about going to the Bahamas to teach in the school that they had down there. And our kids asked us if we could reconsider that so they could stay and finish school in the school they were in, because they'd been to like 3 different schools through this whole thing. So we said, we prayed about it, said, okay. Turns out there was more to that story that our kids didn't know, but God did. My father died later that year.
Mhm.
6 months later, we brought our mother up, my mother up, to live with us because she was basically dying, living in a home by herself. And she ended up living with us for, 9 years? And then that's when we went back to the mission board and God honored that and found a spot for us to go. So, but yeah, there were things that we didn't even know behind the scenes that God knew, that this was all coming down the road and you still need to be here for this. So, yeah.
And I would just say, like, when I talk about the burning bush, Moses didn't ask for a burning bush. Joshua didn't ask for an angel.
No.
Mary didn't ask for an angel.
No.
I don't think it's proper to say, all right, God, show me my burning bush.
Yeah.
I think it's just like, you know, what one of my friends said about my daughter, okay, God told her she's supposed to change her major to youth ministry.
Yeah.
Did he tell her how to pay for it? No,
Yeah.
he didn't. So you
Yeah.
gotta figure that part out,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
He didn't tell her to leave the college she was at. He didn't tell her to, you know, whatever.
Yeah.
So I think that, and most times it's using our mental faculties and the resources we have, unless, I mean, really, we have the Bible and we look at it and it's full of miracles and full of all of these things. But over the course of history, however long you believe that spans, right? What percentage of people really did have, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, those are the
Very
things that are
small.
recorded in Scripture. But most of us have to,
Very small
yeah,
number. Yeah.
unless you, and the ones who are,
Yeah.
who did, they did because they birthed the Messiah, or they,
Right,
you know,
right.
did some, you know, they led the people out of
Yeah.
Egypt and things like
Yeah.
that. Like, we can't all be called to do that.
No. And I
But you
think,
can't also say that just because it's absent in the Bible, that people haven't had those experiences.
Sure.
Yeah.
Large number, right? So
Right.
there are many angelic visitations that people have had that
Sure.
have never been recorded in Scripture.
Sure.
yeah.
So while they don't ask for burning bushes, the counter to that is there were periods of time where they had an ephod and literally asked. And you have, I mean, if all of us had red lights and green lights,
Yeah.
we would just ask and, well, it turns green, let's go. It says
Yeah.
red, stop. I mean, it would be, so there is that part of it as well, right?
Yeah.
You know, that when, to your point, right, you don't step out into kind of foolishness without some deep sense of or
Yeah.
calling that like
Yeah.
it is there. And oftentimes like devoid of own personal ambition,
Yeah.
right? So that's the
Yeah.
piece, right? So when you talk about like the idol, I think very rarely is work actually the idol. I think it's a means to an end,
Yeah.
which is actually the idol.
Okay.
So for some people, it's wealth,
Yep.
it's finances.
Mhm.
So even in your circumstance, right, the decision you really had to make was more money, time with family,
Right.
right? It wasn't perhaps like the other things that other people get from work, which sometimes is like, hey, position of prominence and power within the
Yeah.
structure as I work my way up the corporate hierarchy, right?
Yeah.
But generally speaking, the job in and of itself is not the idol. I mean, so when you talk about like people working, like, throughout Scripture, like when you're a shepherd, like you don't work an 8-hour day.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
You worked all day long.
Yeah.
So like that was so the job, the function that you're serving in terms of the job, it's like you have to ask yourself, well, what's the actual idol here? Why can't I walk away from this? Why
Right.
is this getting in the way of family and
Yeah.
and time with God and
Yeah.
doing all these other types of things? So it to me is like it's a deeper heart question in terms of idolatry as to like what are you actually, because I go to church every single day and go to every special meeting they have, And there could be idolatry in that, right? The
Right.
idolatry isn't necessarily the church, but it's like, hey, you know, I'm on this committee and I lead this thing and I do this thing. And
Uh-huh.
it's, you know, it's no different than going to a job and feeling
Right.
like I have this position of power and prominence. And
Yeah.
sometimes people have to walk away from that stuff.
Yep.
And because it's clothed or shrouded in God's work,
Mhm.
right? We don't do that. So yeah, I mean, it's just uncomfortable for me because, as you said, like you've been burning bushes. It's like you often feel like there's these times in your life where, like, God, like just like I don't know what I'm supposed to do in terms of crossroads. People say, well, just take a step in the. Well, God will close a door if you're not supposed to go in that direction, or He'll open a door here. And I'm like, well, sometimes it seems a bit cliche-ish because sometimes
Yeah.
you have to make some real decisions. They say wait on God, but like,
Yeah.
hey, here's a deadline. Like I have to make a choice, right?
Right.
You have to make a choice. So sometimes you have to just use your faculties
Yeah.
and say, hey, I'm going to trust in the fact
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
I'm making my decision.
Yeah.
And sometimes if you make the wrong decision, you'll know it pretty quick. But yeah, I think I tend to agree with you that all of this, no matter what we talked about over these last couple of weeks, is all a heart issue. Where's your heart? Is
Yeah.
your heart in the right place or is it in the wrong place?
Mhm.
Are you working your butt off at this job to get a position or more pay, and then justifying it by saying, well, now I can provide more for my family?
Yeah.
How
But-
much is enough?
Well, that's it, right? And then,
Yeah,
then it
how
turns
much
into
more?
four-wheelers,
Right.
And a remodeled basement,
Right.
and a
And
house
come
where you
on.
have you know a room to entertain and a room to sit in and
Yeah.
everything else. And at the very end of the day, you sit in your castle. You say, "Well, this is great." I mean, that's the classic. It's like
Yeah.
American lifestyle. It's like
Yeah, and it's like, it's something I said quite a few weeks ago when we were talking about greed and all of that. There are many, many rich people in this country and probably around the world who are not happy. They probably have all the money they'll ever need for their life and for the life of their family, and they're still not happy. So something's missing, and that's where the heart issue comes in. Their heart's not in the right place, so they're still unhappy. Yeah.
When we lived in Alaska, I was making, gosh, if it wasn't minimum wage, it was just a little bit above it. And Don was working, and we were doing okay, but there were bills and stuff, and I started thinking about looking for another job. And at our
Right.
church, this guy came to me and he said, "You can get a job where I work." I said, he saw, I'll talk to my boss. I said, okay. And it was with a thing called Anchorage Parking Authority.
Okay.
And they basically just went around and gave parking tickets to people. And I was like, okay. I'm like, they're hated, but
The tax collector.
it sounds like, you know,
So are safety managers.
it's a lot more than what I was making and stuff. Yeah, it's a lot more than what I'm making. Okay. And he got me a job. And he said, the only problem is you have to start right away. And I was talking to Don about it, and I was like, you know, it would be good to have the extra pay, but, and I was saying, you know, this would be a real sacrifice of work. If I just leave, I said, I can't come back.
Yeah. Right.
I was like, if I just leave, I would just
Right.
close all doors
Yeah.
to this job.
Yeah.
And I'd already come back, left and came back once.
Okay.
And we were praying about it and stuff, and I'm like, would God really want me to do this?
To just leave.
Just
Yeah.
for some more money.
Yeah.
It might, you know, I mean, it's a person's reputation too and stuff. And I decided not to. And the funny thing was, it's like a month later or something.
I don't know where you're going with
They
this.
got
so-
rid of the Anchorage Parking Authority. Everybody voted against it. I would have lost my job.
That's because
overnight.
nobody wanted tickets, so
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
right.
They make the police do it now, but I would have lost my job overnight and everything.
And then you would have been, you'd have been out in the cold.
You don't remember that?
So, yeah, I think the whole thing with career is it's fine to have goals. It's fine to even have monetary goals for your career as long as you have the right perspective. That's not the thing that you, as he said, absorbs all your emotion and mental energy, time, resources, and takes you away from God. So, yeah.
The
Okay.
tough thing, just real quick, the tough
Good.
thing about that always is that like you said, shepherds worked, you said
Yeah.
shepherds all day. Right?
Yeah, they have to be relieved, you
Is
know,
that
they can't
we,
just leave.
is that we, you know, we work 40, 50 hours a week, whatever we work, that's always going to be the bulk of our day, of our week. We're gonna spend, just because we spend more time doing that, like,
Yeah.
God knew we would going to
Yeah.
be spending our day working
Yeah.
one way or
We
another.
spend more
That
time
doesn't
working and
mean-
sleeping than anything
Yeah,
else.
we're gonna spend more time at work than we probably are with our families, than we probably are with all of these other things. That doesn't necessarily mean it's an idol, so we shouldn't feel guilty
Right.
about that, but it's really, you know, yeah, that's something I would caution us, that we just don't look at it like,
Yeah.
that it's automatically an idol because, you know, it's taking more time than anything else.
Yeah.
Well, the difficulty it is in the modern context, right? When you are working, you're away from your family. In the historical
Sure.
context, when you were working all day,
Yeah,
you were working with your family.
sure.
Right.
So you see
True.
this more so with the Amish than you obviously do with our
Correct.
Sure.
But it's like if I'm a farmer and I'm out all day with my sons in the field.
Right.
I mean, I'm not absent of being a father while I'm at work.
Right,
Sure.
right.
But that's obviously a very different situation. We're not
Correct.
taking our kids to work, and we're not
Yeah.
essentially mentoring them throughout the day, which is when much of that life skill was being taught. So right, so
Yeah.
that's kind of the difficulty when it comes to like fulfilling the role.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah, because while you're at work, your kids are at school. So
Right.
they're being educated and taught,
By the government.
basically, yeah.
So I
And-
homeschool. So-
Yeah, so, yeah, it's tough.
Except for take your child to work day, one day.
Yeah.
And I do. I take her to work with me.
One day a year, you get
I
to
work
bring your
one day a
family to work.
week.
Yeah,
Yeah,
And I take Sarah with me.
well, and it's
And they actually offered her a job for next year, so she'll get paid for going. I said, that means you actually have to work.
Well, and also with like jobs, right? So we see like money can be an idol, we say position can be an idol, right? And you often think about work within this context, but then you have to like ask yourself, okay, well, what about stay-at-home moms, right?
Okay.
Does idolatry still exist within that, that
Yes.
context? And I think that, very much so. You could argue that there are certain things about like the identity, the role,
Mhm.
the tasks one's accomplishing, everything else. You have to be careful that even in serving in that specific capacity of
right,
work,
right.
that we say, well, idolatry is not possible there because
Yeah.
we're not dealing with monetary position, you're there with your
Right,
family and
right,
everything else.
right.
But unquestionably, some of that stuff still gets in the way of their relationship with God.
Oh, yeah.
And so that's kind of like, ultimately, that's why you have to kind of, I think, dig deeper into like what really one is looking for idolatry, because otherwise you run the risk of people dismissing it
Yeah.
and saying, well, no, I spend plenty of time with my kids and
Yeah.
everything else. Like I look at some of the families now and it's like travel team with their sports. It's like every single weekend, all
Yeah.
it is like chasing up and down the East Coast and
Yeah.
everything else, and say, well, I'm spending so much time with my family. Well, but there's no time for anything else, right?
Right.
And so, anyway, I just think you just have to really widen the perspective. I think
Yeah.
if you're doing a deep search of the heart in terms of idolatry.
Yeah.
Because I know for me, like my idolatry is security. It's security. So while I can clothe it in all the things that I'm supposed to do as a responsible father, a responsible husband, a responsible person financially of saving and everything else, well, like how much savings is enough? Like how much,
Yeah.
how much safety and security does my family need in order for me to be okay with like letting down the guard on that and being like, okay, because it's obviously there's not a full trust in God
Mhm.
if what I have to always do is make sure, hey, do we have enough finances to like, if I
Right.
lose my job for, because it's first, if I can't pay my bills in a month, then we cover it. Well, 2 months. Well, okay, 5 months, right? But then it's like, well, what if I lose my job for a year? You just always up the ante. The idolatry is still there.
Yeah.
Right, so that's why I'm saying for each person, I think it has to be a very deep soul search. Where other people can save lots of money and do all kinds of things, and their heart is just like, well, we have extra money and we're going to save it or responsible. But I know for me, it's a deep-seated distrust for safety and security in the future.
Mhm.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that can be that way. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you brought up about stay-at-home mothers and idolatry things. The next thing I was going to go into would fit right into that, and that's cultural and political issues. Now, Should Christians be informed of political and cultural issues? I would agree, yes. I think we need to be. But some Christians can go too far with the concept and it becomes their overriding item in their life. They're so focused on the political issues, and this can lead to other sins like judgmentalism, anger, things like that, because now you're so absorbed this political issue that anybody who disagrees with you, now you're judgmental or you get angry with them. So, do you know anybody who is so politically charged in what they talk about, and how do you deal with them?
Just go to your social media feed.
Yeah.
I mean, you see it. It's like
Yeah.
It's crazy.
The person, it's like you can see these people just post the same stuff over and over.
Yeah.
I have a woman that I loosely work with, and I don't know what her religious affiliation is, but lately, she's a really nice person, but lately she's been just posting about like what your version of Christianity is if you don't agree with her politically.
Yes, thank you. Yes.
And I just say, like, I don't know, I mean, I disagree with people. I actually still like her. I'll probably see her next week sometime and be like, have a
Yeah.
nice conversation with her.
Yeah.
As long as we don't talk about politics.
Yeah.
But I can separate that.
Yeah.
But a lot of people just can't. And I don't get into politics about it, but I understand politics is important. I understand we're in important times right now. Both sides believe that the democracy is going to fall any day now, which is crazy to me that both sides believe that.
Because we're not a democracy, we're a republic.
Yeah, I know. Well, yeah.
Well, see, there's an argument you're gonna get.
Right. My thing is like,
We
I
are a
stand in
republic.
democracy because so-and-so's doing this. I'm like, well, this is what they voted for. Isn't that democracy?
Yeah.
But anyway, that's not my point. My point is just that, like, I don't know. I want to go back to the days when you voted and then you went back to your life and you just, where you didn't know how your neighbors voted. I mean, I think social media is a really big part of it. Everybody has
Yeah.
a platform now, and it's not healthy.
No, it's not. Everybody can say whatever they want, and there's no circumstances involved with it. It's just out there. And what was that one I told you one time? It was a football coach. Can't remember his name. Edwards. He used to play for the Eagles. He was a football coach.
Herman?
Herm Edwards. Used to tell his players, you can type up whatever you want on social media or email. He said, but don't press send.
Yeah.
There you go.
He said, read it again to think about it, and don't press send. So,
I do that.
yeah.
Most times I don't. Mostly on Facebook. If I go on Facebook, then I want to say something. I'm like, I'm not saying that.
Yeah.
What's the point?
I
On
mean,
somebody else's
everybody in
post.
my family knows that sometimes I get too much into politics. I do. But the reason why was because it got so bad the other way just a few years ago. I mean, like, you couldn't say anything.
Yeah.
You were scared to say anything, or you'd lose your job, you could lose your home, you could lose
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I I think that's part of it, though, because people are so afraid that we're going to go back to the way that things were back then.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't take much.
Yeah.
Yeah, but like Betsy said, for people to post, that I'm not being a Christian because I don't believe this.
Yeah.
That's just pushing a button that, again, I typed something and then did not send it because she is a dear friend and we had been friends since high school, but I was, I said we already had falling out over COVID, 5 years ago, and just getting that back, and I don't want to,
Yeah.
Yeah.
We lost friends partially because of COVID years ago. So, yeah.
Many years ago, probably 18 years ago now, 16 years ago now, George Bush was president. And at my job, my boss's father was probably in the 70s at the time, 60s, something like that. Very liberal and whatever. He just, I guess it was after, I can't remember, maybe after Obama got elected or while he was running, and he said, I just can't believe 50% of America is like, I just can't believe all these people are one-sided, that's stupid. Like, this was before everybody said that, now everybody says it, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, you really think that like half of America is just stupid? And he did, but now we've gotten to the point where everybody thinks that. Everybody thinks that half of America is just like, seriously, when I go on, I don't go on Facebook much, but when I do, and I somehow see what the other side is saying, I'm like, they're in a whole nother world, and they sound crazy, and they must look at us and go, you're in a whole nother world. You sound like a lunatic.
Yeah.
And I can't help but think that somebody's pulling all those strings somewhere. You know what I mean? It's,
Oh, yeah.
I just, like, dividing us is the point. I don't know. But I just don't think that, I guess my point of saying that was, like, I never thought that the people that disagreed with me were stupid or evil.
Yeah.
I just thought, now I just think, okay, they have a different news source than I
Yeah.
do. Of course they think that way. I thought that way through
They have a
COVID.
different opinion.
It makes sense that they think that way because that's what their news sources are feeding them.
Yeah.
But I don't think they're stupid, and I could still be friends with them. But I don't think that goes. I say it doesn't go both ways, but that's because I'm judging it by the loudest voices on social media. You know what I mean?
Well,
There probably
squeaky-
are plenty
the
of people on the
squeaky
other
wheel always
side
gets
that would
the
have
oil.
a civil conversation with me, but they're not the ones that would be,
Yeah.
mouthing off on social media.
The squeaky wheel always gets the oil. So whoever shouts the loudest is the one that's going to get heard. Whether it's right or wrong, doesn't matter. They don't care. So,
Well, and we have to avoid the temptation to think that this is something that is symptomatic of string pullers. I think instead what we have to look at is the idea, what we were kind of referencing about 15 minutes ago or something, about people being gods of their own world.
yes.
And so what has happened, I think, as time has gone on, is that people increasingly see themselves as the embodiment of truth.
Mhm.
And
Yep.
my perspective, my experience, things I know,
Mhm.
this is true. Even devoid sometimes of evidence. And all of us have come into contact with folks who have heard them protest about X, Y, or Z.
Yeah.
And then you give them demonstrable evidence, and then they change to, they don't change their opinion, they just change to a different argument.
Different argument, yeah. Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, they just want to be right, and they don't want someone to tell them they're wrong.
Yeah.
So whether it's a COVID argument, and people, whatever the argument is, this is the way that everyone should be doing it. So
Right.
it goes back to that sort of Garden of Eden experience. It says that, about the tree of knowledge and this idea of playing the role of God, and people do that, and then they stand on their soapbox and they profess it. Right? Like, I find for like my own mental health and well-being, as an elected official, I avoid social media completely.
Yeah.
And there's much protesting about the building of the building in Mount Joy right now, and I had my particular stance on that, and I articulated that stance in opposition to some of the building of that. But I also see the arguments and see that no matter, there's 6 arguments that you could find today, and if you answered all 6 of those arguments, those same people would find another 6
Yeah,
arguments.
yeah.
Because at the end of the day, that's not the, at the end of the day, some people they do not want this thing right next to that. And they'll find a justification for why it shouldn't be there.
Why it shouldn't
What
be
is
there.
it?
Well, now they're building a borough hall and a police station along the splash pad.
yeah.
Right? So, and I had my opposition to it. And again, but the folks, if they would have tuned in to the actual political conversation
Right.
that had been talked about for 4 or 5 years, who no one emerged in any meetings and
Yeah.
had anything to say,
Yeah.
right? They would have been able to articulate those things. Now it's happening, and it's changed. So you'll get things like splash pad. Oh, well, that just means we'll have to listen to kids screaming all the time. And I'm like, well, the location it was being built in is 10 years ago, there was an elementary school there, and there was recess 3 times a day. Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
like
like a ballpark now, like.
yeah, it's a ballpark. So, but that's my point. Like, whatever the opposition
Right,
is,
so what?
like you're gonna hear.
Kids are making noise in the middle of the day.
Well,
Exactly.
yes.
So what?
But again,
And
because
say,
we have
"Guys, you
grown
don't have
accustomed
fun."
to
Yes.
my quiet neighborhood, this is what I want. Like, I mean, it's the classic not in my backyard.
Not in my backyard.
Oh, yeah.
Like folks want it. Like folks will complain that they can't buy things in the local area. But you have to drive all the way to Lancaster to even get a pair of socks. But don't build a Walmart near my house.
Yes.
Right? You know,
Yeah.
so it's you can't
Yeah.
satiate the people. So now, and that doesn't mean that politicians haven't contributed to the system in their own.
Oh, they have.
You know, horrible,
Yeah, they
horrible
have.
ways. But I just think that the divisiveness that we're seeing, it's really just, we're looking in a mirror. We're really looking in a mirror of ourselves and the direction that ultimately mankind is going to be heading. The Bible makes no qualms about this.
Yeah.
In the last days, it
Yeah.
clearly articulates
Oh,
it's
yeah.
not going to be sunshine and roses.
No.
So we
No.
know the direction that it goes, and it's a direction where man is elevating himself into the position of God. And as man does that, and you have everybody playing their own little gods,
Yeah.
it is going to be massively divisive. Could you imagine if there were 10 gods that were all having to fight it out? We get an idea of that. We called it, you know, polytheism, and
Yeah.
the gods
Yeah.
fought within those systems
Yeah.
because they all were vying for position of top. Well, if we put ourselves into that position, that's what we're going to experience. And so
Yeah.
that's where we're
I
at.
don't know if you were here earlier, but I had said that my opinion of society in whole right now is the last verse in Joshua where he says, every man is doing what is right
Yeah.
in his own eyes.
That was the reference I was making.
Yeah.
Going back to what we talked about 15 minutes ago.
Yeah.
And I think that's where you get the divisiveness.
Oh, yeah.
And I just want to say, like, I was thinking when you said that the first time, the context of that verse, too, is that they didn't have judges, they didn't have laws, they didn't have the Ten Commandments.
They had the Mosaic
They
Law,
had the
yeah.
Mosaic Law, right? But they didn't have judges, they didn't
Right.
have rule of law.
Right.
And I was thinking around this conversation, I think that what we're dealing with right now is, yes, we're all different gods, but we don't have a shared truth anymore. Whether it's Christian truth or even American truth, Christian, you know,
Right.
what is truth? You know, when you lack like if you all came together and said, okay, we disagree about a lot of things, but at least we agree on this. You know, 9/12, the day after 9/11, that was a perfect example of it.
Yeah.
Okay, we all have our political disagreements, but we all agree this is wrong. We have to come
Yeah.
together, and
Yeah.
we don't have any kind of a shared thing. And so that's where I think that why we can say you disagree with me, you know,
Yeah.
you're my enemy. We can't, you know, we just can't come around and say, yeah, we have our like I'm sure in the
Yeah.
church we have our disagreements, but we
Yeah.
have things in common that bind us together.
Yeah.
And I think we're losing that sense of, and I'm not idolizing like nationalism or anything like that, but I mean in a sense that does guard against that, and so does
Yeah.
just even if you just having a belief in the Bible that we've had for decades or centuries, that we don't even
Yeah.
share that anymore really as a culture. I think that makes it really, really hard if we're just talking about it culturally, but biblically, I mean, I think you're right on. We're all just doing what we think is right in our own eyes, and absent of that canon of truth, any kind of canon of truth, then it's just, I'm just elevating my opinion
Then do
above
whatever I
everybody
want.
else's.
Yeah.
But I think there is a sense too, like yes, I'm elevating my opinion here, but then I'm also surrounded by these people online that agree with me and support me, and you know what I mean? Like it's not just, I didn't just make it up myself.
Well, and people find echo chambers, right?
Echo
Yeah.
chambers,
You
yeah.
get into echo
Yeah.
chambers,
Yeah.
and you're left with that.
Yeah.
And then you get a spirit of divorce, right? Because
Yeah.
really what it did, I mean, it's rooted in the same stuff, right? When you talk about like high levels of divorce in America, and now the conversation is going beyond high levels of divorce. Now it's going into people not even wanting to be married in the first place.
Right.
And like again,
Absolutely.
understanding the necessary compromises that have to take place within relationship. Well, if everybody's
Right.
their little God, you don't have to make compromise. God
Right.
doesn't compromise, right?
Right.
So I shouldn't have to compromise.
Right.
And I mean, so you're at a place where, again, we're just seeing all of, I think, the direct outcropping of a postmodern approach to life.
Right.
That everybody is the source of their own truth.
Yep. That's
And
right.
even when they are married, like divorce is the easy way out instead of trying to work things out, honestly. They're not willing to fight. You know, I mean, we don't have a perfect marriage, 32 years, you're gonna fight. you know, you're gonna argue, and, you know, but no, neither one of us is walking out the door, you know, so.
I was gonna add to that too, even when you do get married, then there's like, oh, maybe I don't wanna have kids, you know, because there's sacrificing, is that the word you, wasn't sacrificing, so
Yeah.
the word you used? Sacrifice. No, it wasn't sacrifice, it was something else, God doesn't compromise.
Compromise, yeah.
Yeah, we're seeing that people are having children later and later, saying,
Yep.
maybe I don't wanna have children, and,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, it's all,
narcissism.
it's all based on.
Yeah, we shouldn't be surprised that it's narcissism when this I mean, not to be like this generation, but they grew up doing this.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, we do it too, we're adults, but I think about, you know, the kids that just grew up with a camera in their face, and the sixth generation is constantly, you watch videos online of kids, I'm like, okay, they just did something bad, and the parents' first instinct was to get the camera out and video it so the world can see it. I can't imagine what it's like growing up like that, growing up where every time myself, like every time I did something funny, that there'd be a camera on me. I mean, gosh, I would just be the funniest person ever. I would do it all the time for the attention.
Yeah.
Like, or bad, you know,
Yeah.
then I can't even imagine the
So the
narcissism.
sociological research suggests that the emerging American values that are growing are self-fulfillment and narcissism. And it dates back, it actually predates millennials.
Yeah, it's all about me.
But in fairness, right, so there's often shots thrown against the millennials.
Yeah.
But when I look at the baby boomer generation, it is the first generation that in many respects abdicated its role within with the larger family system. When you look at the generations that preceded the baby boomers, and part of this had to do with the way in which the social care systems were, that it was always, the grandparents were always an extension of the core nuclear family.
Right.
They didn't abdicate the role.
Right.
They didn't look forward to retirement, packing up, moving to Florida, away from the rest of their family, to go down there and to hang out and to do all the things that they've earned through their many years of hard work. Now I've earned time off. And so, in many respects, all that is self-fulfillment. What do I want to do with the time? And they abdicated the role of what does it mean to be daily in the lives of those who are in your family unit.
Yeah.
How are you doing that living 700-800 miles away?
Yeah.
Wasn't it advocated both ways though, in the generation that said, well, let's have the government pay for our parents in their retirement and their health care instead of
Yeah.
me paying for it, bringing them into my home.
Yep.
You didn't really have any other option
Yep.
then, but now that, yeah, sorry, we're getting on.
Yeah.
No, that's it. You're right. It is.
You know, then it's like, yeah, much better to have the government pay for that, and then I can continue to live my life. Yeah, you're talking about social structures that around family, which, you know, I heard someone say this just this week, like, besides night and day, you know, one of the first things that God created when he created man was he created family. Like that was the first system of governance, if you will, was the family, the nuclear
Right.
family. And I think that's what we're all talking about. It's the gradual disintegration. It's gradual and then all at once, you know, disintegration of the family and
Yeah.
yeah.
Just in that last point, like my point wasn't to point fingers just exclusively at baby boomers. My point was that within every generation,
Yeah.
you can see the inherent sin nature of
Yeah.
man
Oh, yeah.
manifesting.
Yeah.
And now you have less social control.
Yeah.
So now everybody is free to, I guess, manifest those qualities in a much more overt way.
Yeah. And do whatever they want.
That's right.
Yeah. And there's no,
Restraint.
what's that?
Restraint.
Yeah, no restraint whatsoever. So, okay. All right, we're going to get to the last point here. And this one hit me because of who I am. And that is passion for sports. Is it wrong to be a sports fan?
Fanatic.
I said fan. not
Yeah.
fanatic.
That's the root word of fan,
I know, I
right?
understand.
Right?
Well, that could go back to
Right.
what you said about traveling teams,
Yeah.
you know, where, oh yeah, let's travel, let's spend all day traveling here. Like, I don't know, we were definitely the house where a lot of kids came to in the neighborhood to play. You know, I'm sure parents
That
were
was our
glad
house,
to
too.
shove their kids off. Oh yeah, go to Don's house. Like they never even checked on them, did they? we
They
would have
trusted
no
you.
parents come check on their kids. And it was kind of like, oh, I always made sure I had, you know, what are the long frozen pops, you know?
We had Kool-Aid.
Yeah, but it was just, I don't know, I guess growing up, we were always outside, always, and it just, but
Well,
traveling teams, we stopped that with our kids, like, we made sure, I mean, even when Anna did volleyball that one season, I was gone like all weekend. You know, from morning to evening, you know, every Saturday, I was sitting, you know, watching her play volleyball. It was long, it was tiring. And that was the only time we did that, because I was like, no more, no more.
Well, I think the root of this goes back to our discussion on competitiveness and how things can get out of hand. And one of the things I wrote in here is, if you think about it, college recruiting for sports is big business.
It is.
They spend tons of money recruiting these kids to get them to come to their college. And I mean, that's huge. And then I think back to the thing I saw in the news a couple weeks ago, where it was a high school basketball game out in western Pennsylvania, and the parents in the stands were fighting with each other. And then the kids got involved. And I'm watching that and I'm thinking, this is why I stopped doing midget football, because of the parents. They're worse than the kids.
Yeah, it's
And it's all based in competitiveness and that winning is everything. And you know, and my kid's gonna be a superstar, and probably not, but that's what they think. But then I put professionals at a different level, because they're getting paid to be competitive. That's their job.
sure.
That's a whole different thing from, you know, I think somebody had brought up when we talked about competitiveness, about how the parent got so involved in the child's life that they had to do this, and we got to take you there so you can learn that. We got to take you over here so you can learn that, and it gets crazy. So I mean, and even we've seen this. I mean, football is such a big deal in Texas that most of the high school football fields are bigger than college football fields. I mean, it can really get out of hand. My wife can tell you that years ago I was such a crazy sports fan that she would walk into the room with the telephone and I'd say, "What's that for?" And she'd say, "So you can call the coach and tell him what he's doing wrong."
If only.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah, exactly. Now I critique the referees because I was a referee for 20
That's right.
years.
Well, now it goes into just thinking of the basketball right now, March
Yeah,
Madness, and
yeah.
people betting.
Yes.
games,
Oh, yeah.
You know, and how.
That's huge, big business.
Well, even the Super Bowl, you know,
Yeah.
Because they lost, was
Yeah.
it because they threw the game? You know,
Yeah.
and I'm like, now you can't even go back to the 80s when football was football and no
Yeah.
reruns and all that.
Yeah.
you
Yeah,
know?
yeah.
Yeah.
You guys are getting concussions all the time.
Well, they still are.
Yeah. I mean, you can root for your favorite sports team without it becoming an idol. It doesn't have to be. Years ago, I would get so frustrated when the teams lost, but now it's like, there's nothing I can do about it. They lost. Let's move on to the next game, and go from there. But yeah, I know people who, when their team loses, they're crushed. And to me now, that has become an idol, because they're putting so much time and effort into this, and now they lost and they're crushed. So,
There's something about cheering with all your heart and soul and mind.
Yeah.
It sounds like idolatry. For something that really is insignificant. That
Right.
really isn't. It's not life and death. It's just a game.
yeah,
And that's part of the appeal, is to get carried away in something that doesn't matter. But then when you, at the end of the day, if you don't remember that it doesn't matter,
right.
it's sort of like, like take any event,
Yeah.
like you're playing ping pong with my son yesterday, and you're like totally into it, and then the game's over, and you're like, okay, it's over, but it's
Yeah.
fun to play like it means something.
Yeah,
I think that's what sports has.
Yeah.
That it's a low stakes game, really, unless you're a professional athlete.
Yeah.
And you get to cheer it on and
Yeah.
invest your whole self in it for 3 hours or 2
Oh,
hours,
yeah.
or whatever it is. But sometimes we get ourselves into that world and then we're starting to be fed by it somehow and we can't let go of it.
I'll go to games and cheer when the team I'm rooting for does something right, you know what I mean? There's nothing wrong with that, but then when I leave and go out in the parking lot, game's over and I left it all behind and let's go, we're going home.
And that's the beauty of sports, I think.
Yeah.
Not like politics,
Yeah.
where it's really
Yeah,
like,
you can't just-
you want to just
Yeah.
So, or other battles in your life that are
Yeah.
like real. You're battling cancer or you're battling something like that.
Yeah.
It's like, that's real life. It is, part of the appeal of it is that it's for us anyway,
Yeah.
the spectators. It's not real life.
Yeah, it's not, and for me, it's kind of a, for the moment, escape from reality,
Yeah.
because I'm putting myself in the place of these players and what they're going through, and then when it's over, it's like, okay, back to normal.
By the way, this is why they ruin it when they start talking about politics in sports. Because it's like, I'm not there for that. I'm there to escape all of that and
Right.
just invest myself in something that doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And you want me to think, or you want me to,
Yeah,
whatever, have some political stand. It's like,
Yeah.
no, we're not talking about that right now.
yeah, yeah. I guess I get too involved if I'm critiquing the referees, but that's so, okay. So he finished off with, where do we go from here? And I wrote it in there, back to the beginning. And then I put down 5 things to help us recognize and confess our own respectable sins. I mean, I know I have some, so I can already, from just this, I've identified what mine are. But ask God to show us the areas of our acceptable sins. Look to the gospel. Remember back to the beginning that the gospel is not just to use it to save souls. The gospel is also for us. It teaches us. Walk by the Spirit and His enabling power. It's up here. Find scripture that may address your sin and memorize it. Or a scripture that will help you if you feel that temptation or that sin coming. There's plenty of scripture in the New Testament that you can use to help you with that. And he recommended a bunch even from the Old Testament and the Psalms that you can use. And then the last thing I have here is pray. Call out to God. He will never leave us or forsake us. So if we call out to Him about these sins and pray, He will not only identify them, but He'll help us get through them. Whether it's being going back to the gospel and reading some, or some of the scriptures that He recommends, God will help us through it. So, that was it.